Imagine you're driving home late at night, the roads are empty, your music is low, and you're maybe 10 minutes from your front door. Then you see it, flashing blue and red lights in your rearview mirror. Your heart jumps, your palms get sweaty, and within seconds, a routine traffic stop turns into something that could haunt you for years. Not because you did anything wrong, but because of what you say next. Here's a question most people never think about until it's too late. Did you know that the single most dangerous moment of a traffic stop isn't when the officer approaches your window? It's when you open your mouth. What you say in those first 60 seconds can be taken, twisted, recorded, and used against you in ways you'd never expect. And almost nobody talks about this part. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why staying quiet might be the smartest thing you ever do, and why one innocent sentence could cost you your license, your freedom, or worse. Stick with me, because what I'm about to tell you isn't legal advice you hear every day. It's based on real case law, actual body cam footage, and the kind of mistakes that officers themselves admit people make over and over again. Let's rewind to that moment in your car. The officer walks up, flashlight in hand, and asks the first question almost everyone gets wrong. Do you know why I pulled you over? Seems harmless, right? Polite even. You want to be cooperative. You want to seem honest. So you start guessing. Was I speeding? Did I roll through that stop sign back there? Stop right there. By answering that question, you've just done something most drivers never realize. You've admitted to a potential violation without the officer even having to prove it. In court, that guess can be entered as an admission. And here's the disturbing part. Officers are trained to ask that exact question specifically because people willingly confess to things the officer might not have even noticed. But here's where it gets strange. You actually have a constitutional right to remain silent during a traffic stop. That's not just something from TV dramas. In the United States, the Fifth Amendment protects you from self-incrimination. In the United Kingdom, the right to silence under the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994 still carries weight, but almost no one uses it. Why? Because we've been conditioned to be polite, to be helpful, to assume that if we've done nothing wrong, we have nothing to hide. That assumption, it's dangerously wrong. Let me give you a real example. In 2019, a driver in Ohio was pulled over for a broken taillight. The officer asked, "Have you been drinking tonight?" The driver hadn't, but he was nervous, so he said, "I had one beer about 4 hours ago." That was true. But the officer smelled nothing, saw no signs of impairment, and had no probable cause. Then the driver volunteered that one sentence. That single admission gave the officer legal grounds to administer a field sobriety test. The driver passed, but he was still detained for 20 extra minutes, searched and given a warning, all because he answered a question he didn't have to answer. Now imagine if that driver had been tired, or had allergies, or had a naturally nervous demeanor. That one beer, perfectly legal, could have been misrepresented in a report as driver admitted to consuming alcohol prior to operation. That's the kind of phrasing that can haunt you. And here's something almost nobody talks about. Body cameras and dash cams are recording everything you say, every stammer, every nervous laugh, every attempt to explain yourself. Those recordings don't just disappear. They get uploaded, stored, and can be used in court months later, often edited or presented out of context. Officers know this. Prosecutors know this. And most drivers? They have no idea. So what should you actually say when the officer asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The answer is simple, legal, and surprisingly effective. "I'm not sure, officer." That's it. You're not being rude. You're not being uncooperative. You're simply refusing to guess, because guessing can only hurt you. It cannot help you. Think about that for a second. There is no scenario where answering that question benefits you in court. None. If you're innocent, your guess might be wrong and create confusion. If you're guilty of something minor, you've just admitted it. Either way, you lose. But this is just the first trap. There are at least 5 more things people say during traffic stops that officers secretly hope you'll volunteer. Let me walk you through the second major mistake. "I only had a couple of drinks." Never, ever say this. Even if you've had nothing, even if you're completely sober. Here's why. The word "only" implies there was something to begin with, and a couple is vague. To an officer writing a report, that phrase becomes driver admitted to consuming alcohol. That's now reasonable suspicion to dig deeper, to ask you to step out, to perform a breathalyzer. And if you refuse that, in most states, refusal triggers an automatic license suspension. But here's the real trap. Let's say you genuinely had 2 beers 3 hours ago, you're well under the limit, and you're completely fine to drive. That statement, "I only had a couple of drinks," will still be used against you in any subsequent legal proceeding. It doesn't matter if you're under the limit. The prosecution will argue that you admitted to drinking and driving. The officer will testify that you appeared nervous. And now a jury hears admitted drinking instead of passed every test. The safe answer? "I haven't had anything to drink tonight, officer." That's a complete sentence. It doesn't invite follow-up. And if that's true, you've given nothing more than the truth without volunteering extra information. But what if you have had a drink? What if you're genuinely worried? Then your answer is even simpler. Officer, I'm going to exercise my right to remain silent. Say it calmly, say it respectfully, then stop talking. I can feel some of you tense up just reading that, because we've been taught that silence looks guilty. That's a psychological trick, not a legal reality. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court has repeatedly held that silence alone cannot be used as evidence of guilt. The U.K. has similar protections, but here's the catch. You have to actually remain silent. Not silent except for explaining why you're silent. Not silent, but nervous. Just silent. And that brings us to the third thing you should never say during a traffic stop. This one surprises almost everyone. I'll just answer a few questions, officer. Why is this dangerous? Because once you start answering, you've established a pattern of cooperation. Legally, that pattern can be used to argue that you waived your rights. If you answer 3 questions, then refuse the 4th, an officer can claim you were being selective, which makes you look suspicious. Courts have upheld this logic. In fact, in Bergheis v. Tompkins 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that a defendant who remained silent for hours but then answered a few questions had implicitly waived their right to remain silent. That means partial silence isn't protection. You're either exercising your rights consistently or you're not. So if you start chatting, you've opened the door. And officers know exactly how to walk through it. Let me give you a real psychological pattern here. Most people, when they're nervous, over-explain. They talk too much, they repeat themselves, they offer details no one asked for. And every single extra word is a potential weapon. Officers are trained to let you talk. They'll nod. They'll seem friendly. They'll ask open-ended questions like, so where are you coming from tonight? Or what's the hurry? Those aren't casual questions. Those are investigative techniques. Where are you coming from might seem harmless, but if you say a bar, you've just given probable cause for an alcohol investigation. If you say a friend's house, they might ask if drugs were present. If you say work, they might ask what you do. And if you mention anything involving driving, that opens new lines of questioning. See how this works? One innocent answer leads to another, until you've built a case against yourself without ever realizing it. Here's a line that changes everything, and I want you to memorize it. Officer, I don't consent to any searches, and I'm going to remain silent. That's it. That's your script. Say it clearly. Say it once, then stop. Now let's talk about the 4th mistake. And this one breaks my heart because it happens to good people all the time. You can check the car. I have nothing to hide. Oh, I know why you'd say this. You're innocent. Your car is clean. You believe that cooperating will make the officer trust you and let you go faster. But here's the brutal reality. Consenting to a search never speeds things up. It only gives permission for the officer to take as long as they want, go as deep as they want, and document anything they find, even things that aren't related to the stop. And here's the part most drivers don't know. If an officer asks for permission to search your vehicle, it almost always means they don't already have probable cause. If they had probable cause, they wouldn't need your permission. They'd just search. So when they ask, do you mind if I take a look around? What they're really saying is, I don't have a legal right to search your car unless you say yes. Never say yes. Not because you're hiding something, but because your rights exist for a reason. And every time someone voluntarily gives up their 4th Amendment protection, it normalizes warrantless searches for everyone. You're not being difficult. You're protecting yourself and every other driver on the road. But what if the officer insists? What if they say, if you have nothing to hide, why won't you let me look? That's a psychological pressure tactic. Stay calm. Repeat. I do not consent to any searches, officer. You don't need to explain why. You don't need to justify yourself. No is a complete sentence when it comes to your constitutional rights. Now let's escalate. Because the 5th mistake is the one that actually lands people in handcuffs. I know my rights. I cannot stress this enough. Never say this during a traffic stop. Why? Because to an officer, that phrase sounds like a challenge. It sounds like escalation. It sounds like someone who might become combative. And once an officer perceives a threat, their behavior changes. They call for backup. They become defensive. What could have been a 5-minute warning now becomes a 30-minute detention with multiple officers on scene. Here's the irony. You absolutely do have rights. You should know them. You should exercise them. But announcing that knowledge in the middle of a traffic stop is like holding up a sign that says, I'm going to be difficult. It changes the entire dynamic of the interaction and not in your favor. The correct way to assert your rights is quiet, calm, and consistent. Hand the officer your license, registration, and proof of insurance. Say nothing else except, I'm going to remain silent, officer. That's it. That's the professional way to protect yourself without triggering a defensive reaction. Let me pause here for a second and ask you something. Have you ever been in a traffic stop where you felt like anything you said just made things worse? where you walked away thinking, why did I tell them that? If so, you're not alone. Comment below. What's the one thing you said that you immediately regretted? Because I promise you, thousands of other viewers have made the exact same mistake. Now let's get to the sixth and final mistake. This one is the most dangerous of all. Am I free to go? I'm late for something. Asking if you're free to go is smart, but attaching a reason, I'm late, changes everything. Because now the officer knows you're in a hurry, and if you're in a hurry, you might be more willing to agree to things just to leave faster. You might consent to a quick search. You might answer questions you'd normally avoid. You've just shown your cards. Instead, ask a clean question. Officer, am I free to leave? No explanation, no excuse, no pressure, just the question. If the officer says yes, you leave immediately. Don't thank them repeatedly, don't make small talk, get back in your car and drive away calmly. If the officer says no, then you're being detained. And at that moment, absolutely everything changes. Once you're detained, you are no longer in a voluntary conversation. You are now the subject of an investigation. At that point, your only job is to remain silent, decline all searches, and ask for an attorney if questioning continues. Do not explain, do not argue, do not try to convince the officer you're innocent. Nothing you say at that point will convince them, but it can be used against you. I want to tell you about a case that changed how I think about all of this. In 2015, a young woman in Texas was pulled over for speeding. She was polite. She was cooperative. The officer asked if she had any weapons in the car. She laughed nervously and said, "No, but I have a small pocket knife in my purse for work." That was legal where she lived, but that statement gave the officer probable cause to search her purse. Inside, he found a small amount of marijuana residue on an old container. She was arrested. The charge stuck, all because she volunteered information about a knife that was completely legal to carry. Do you see the pattern? Every word you say narrows your options. Every volunteered detail gives the officer something to work with. Silence gives them nothing. So let me give you a simple 3-step system for every traffic stop from now on. Step 1, pull over safely. Turn on your interior light if it's dark. Keep your hands on the steering wheel and wait for the officer to approach. Step 2, when asked for your license and registration, provide them calmly and say nothing else except, "I'm going to remain silent, officer." Step 3, if the officer asks any follow-up questions, repeat the same phrase. Do not vary it, do not explain it, do not apologize for it. That's it. That's the entire script. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but won't that make the officer angry? Possibly. Some officers don't like it when drivers exercise their rights, but here's the truth. An officer's feelings are not your legal problem. Your freedom is. And no officer has ever arrested someone just for remaining silent. They arrest people for what they say. Let me leave you with one final thought. The goal of a traffic stop isn't to be friendly. It isn't to prove your innocence. It isn't to make the officer like you. The goal is to get home safely without creating evidence that can be used against you later. That's it. That's the whole game. Most people lose that game in the first 30 seconds. They talk, they explain, they apologize. And by the time they drive away, they've handed over everything an officer needs to build a case they never saw coming. You don't have to be one of those people. So the next time those lights appear in your rearview mirror, and if you drive long enough, they will, remember this video, take a breath, keep your mouth shut, and drive away with your rights intact. If this opened your eyes, share it with someone who drives. You might just save them from a mistake they don't even know they're about to make. And if you've got a story from a traffic stop that went wrong or right, drop it in the comments. Because the more we talk about this, the fewer of us get caught in traps we never saw coming. Thanks for watching. Drive safe. And remember, silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's the smartest thing you'll ever say.